Think about something you have been trying to change for a long time. Not for a week, for a long time. Maybe it is the way you respond when you feel criticized. Maybe it is the anxiety that shows up in certain situations. Maybe it is the pattern in your relationships that you can see clearly and cannot seem to stop. Maybe it is the way you shut down when things get hard, or the way you over-prepare for everything, or the way you reach for the same thing when you are tired and it never actually helps. Now think about how hard you have been trying to change it, the awareness you have brought to it, the effort, the conversations, the reading, the times you caught yourself mid-pattern and tried to redirect. Here is what Paul Watzlawick spent his career arguing. In a very specific category of human problems, trying harder does not help. It makes things worse, not because you are doing it wrong, because the trying itself is part of what is maintaining the problem. And until you understand how that works, you will keep doing the one thing that guarantees you stay stuck. Watzlawick was born in Austria in 1921 and spent most of his career at the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto, California, where he worked with Gregory Bateson and a group of researchers who were trying to understand something very specific. Why do some people remain stuck in the same patterns for years, despite genuine effort and genuine desire to change? His background was unusual for a psychologist. He was trained in psychoanalysis, but became deeply skeptical of the idea that insight was sufficient for change. He was interested in communication theory, systems thinking, and a very practical question: what actually moves people? What he and his colleagues kept observing was something that contradicted the common sense of the time. When people tried to solve their problems using the same logic that had created them, the problems persisted. When people tried something that seemed counterintuitive, even absurd, the problems often disappeared quickly. He called this second-order change. And the distinction between first-order and second-order change is, once you understand it, one of the most useful things in psychology. Start with the simplest example he used: insomnia. You cannot sleep. You lie awake. You watch the minutes pass. You become increasingly alert and increasingly frustrated with the fact that you are alert. So, you try harder. You relax your body deliberately. You regulate your breathing. You tell yourself, stop thinking. You count backwards. You try white noise. You rearrange your pillow. You take sleep supplements. You do everything possible to create the conditions for sleep. And the harder you try, the more awake you become. Why? Because sleep is something that happens when you stop efforting. The act of trying to sleep is neurologically incompatible with the state of sleep. Your effort, well-intentioned, entirely logical, is the thing that is keeping you awake. The solution has become the problem. Watzlawick would say, this is a first-order change attempt. You are trying to change something while staying inside the same framework that created it. The framework in this case is, I need to make sleep happen. The more you operate inside that framework, the more sleep recedes. Second-order change would be to change the framework itself. Not try harder to sleep, but give up trying to sleep entirely. Read something boring. Accept that tonight is a non-sleep night. The moment you genuinely stop trying, the effort that was blocking sleep is gone and sleep often arrives. This is not a metaphor. This is the mechanism. Watzlawick kept finding this same pattern in problem after problem. The attempted solution is what maintains the problem. Think about something in your own life that fits this description, something you have been working on, trying to address, putting effort into, and the effort, rather than helping, seems to be part of what keeps it there. Leave it in the comments, even just in one line. Because the first step towards second-order change is seeing the pattern for what it is. Subscribe to the Lucid Mind, not to try harder at understanding yourself. Because sometimes what helps is a completely different angle. The distinction is this. First-order change is change within a system. You modify something about how you are operating, but the operating system itself stays the same. You try harder, do more, apply different tactics, but you are still working within the same fundamental framework. Second-order change is change of the system. You step outside the framework and change the rules by which the game is played. It is not more of the same. It is something qualitatively different. The reason this matters is that most psychological problems are not problems of insufficient effort. They are problems maintained by the very efforts being made to solve them. The framework within which you are trying to change is the thing that needs to change. Watzlawick had a story he told often. A man is walking home drunk late at night. He passes under a streetlight and realizes he has lost his keys. He searches under the light for a while and cannot find them. A policeman comes along and asks what he is looking for. The man explains. The policeman helps him search, and after a while asks, "Are you sure you lost them here?" The man says, "No, I lost them down the street." The policeman is confused. "Why are we looking here then?" The man says, "Because this is where the light is." This is what first-order change looks like. You apply effort where it is familiar and visible where you can see, where you feel competent, not necessarily where the actual problem is. And the problem persists because the effort is directed at the wrong level. Here is how the mechanism works in practice. Someone is anxious in social situations. They develop a strategy for managing this. They prepare extensively before any social encounter. They rehearse conversations, anticipate questions, plan responses. This is a first-order solution. It reduces anxiety in the short term. But the preparation itself communicates a message to the nervous system. This situation is dangerous enough that it requires this much preparation. The preparation maintains and amplifies the belief that the situation is a threat. So the next social encounter requires even more preparation. The anxiety does not decrease over time. It escalates because the solution is confirming the premise. Or consider someone who is afraid of being controlled in relationships. Their solution is to maintain very strong control over their own environment and choices. This is entirely logical from within their framework. If I stay in control, I cannot be controlled. But the hypervigilance about control generates exactly the kind of tension in relationships that makes other people want to impose their will or withdraw, which confirms the original belief that relationships are controlling. The solution produces the outcome it was designed to prevent. Or someone who fears that people will find them boring. Their solution is to work very hard in conversations, prepare interesting things to say, monitor the other person's engagement, adjust their performance in real time. But the monitoring and performing creates exactly the kind of disconnected, slightly effortful quality that makes conversations feel less alive. People sense the performance without being able to name it. The person's attempt to not be boring is what makes the conversations less interesting. The solution produces the problem. In each case, the person is genuinely trying. The logic of their solution is coherent within their framework, and the solution is maintaining the problem. So what does second-order change look like? Watzlawick was a pragmatist. He was not interested in insight as an end in itself. He was interested in what actually changes things. And what he kept finding was that the most effective interventions did not produce understanding, they produced experience. One of his central tools was what he called reframing. A reframe is not a positive spin. It is not telling yourself a more optimistic version of what is happening. It is changing the conceptual framework, the category, the meaning within which a situation is understood in a way that makes a completely different range of responses available. His most cited example? A family in therapy. A teenage boy is rebellious, resistant, difficult. The parents are exhausted and distressed. The therapist reframes the boy's behavior. His refusal to comply is actually protecting the family. He is allowing the conflict to surface so that the real tension in the family system can be addressed. He is, in a sense, being helpful. Nothing about the facts has changed, but the frame has changed. And the changed frame changes how everyone in the room relates to the behavior. The parents are no longer just fighting with the boy. They are responding to something different. The boy experiences the room differently. Possibilities that were invisible become available. A reframe does not convince. It does not argue. It does not provide more information. It shifts the context within which the information means something, and that shift is second-order change. Watzlawick was also deeply interested in paradox as a therapeutic tool. Paradoxical intervention sounds alarming in description, but is very precise in practice. It means prescribing the symptom, deliberately doing the thing you are trying to stop. The classic application: someone who blushes uncontrollably in social situations. Every social encounter is preceded by anxiety about blushing, which causes shame, which amplifies the anxiety before the next encounter. The cycle is self-sustaining. The paradoxical prescription: before the next social encounter, try to blush. Actively attempt to make your face as red as possible. Make yourself blush on purpose. This is absurd. It is also extremely effective. Why? Because voluntary control and involuntary response are incompatible. The moment you try to blush voluntarily, you have stepped outside the anxiety loop. You are no longer the person who is afraid of blushing. You are the person who is trying to blush. The fear cannot coexist with the deliberate attempt. The cycle that maintained the problem has been interrupted. This is not manipulation. It is a precise technical move. The person is not being tricked. They are being given a way out of a system that their usual logic cannot exit. The same principle applies to anxiety about anxiety. The person who dreads their next panic attack spends enormous energy monitoring for its arrival and preparing to stop it. The monitoring is the kindling. The prescription: schedule a panic attack. At 3 p.m. on Tuesday, have a panic attack. Try your hardest to make it happen. In most cases, the panic attack does not arrive. Because the deliberate attempt at it has changed the frame from something happening to you to something you are attempting to do. The agency shifts, and with it, the power of the symptom. Watzlawick had a concept he returned to throughout his work that cuts straight to the heart of why people remain stuck. He distinguished between two types of stability. The first is genuine stability. Things that don't change because they work, because they are genuinely appropriate to the situation. The second is pseudo-stability, or what he sometimes called the stability of the stuck system. Things that don't change because the system keeps generating the same solutions to the same problems. Solutions that maintain the very conditions they are trying to solve. The stuck system is not lazy. It is not indifferent. It is working very hard. It is applying enormous effort. But all the effort is first order. More of the same, harder, faster, with more awareness, with more technique. And the harder it works, the more firmly it is operating within the framework that produces the problem. He wrote, "The more things change, the more they stay the same." What he meant was specific. When you make first-order changes, when you shuffle the pieces without changing the rules, the surface shifts, but the underlying structure remains identical. You feel like you are changing. The system is doing something slightly different, but nothing fundamental has moved. Second-order change feels different. It often feels like giving up. It often involves doing something that makes no sense from within the existing framework. It often requires stepping back from the efforting entirely, not because effort is bad, but because in certain classes of problems, Effort is the thing that maintains the problem. Watzlawick's practical contribution was a question that has stayed with me more than almost anything else in the field. When a problem persists, despite genuine effort, ask this: what is the solution I keep trying? And then ask, how does that solution maintain the problem? Not, how do I try harder? Not, what am I missing that I need to add? But, what is the thing I keep doing that is feeding this? This question has a specific, uncomfortable quality. It requires you to look at your own solutions, things you have invested in, things that feel productive and responsible and like you are at least doing something, and consider that they might be the problem. It is not always the case. Some problems are problems of insufficient effort. Some things do improve with more of the same. But in the class of problems, Watzlawick identified chronic patterns, persistent loops, the thing you have been working on for years that somehow does not shift. The question is almost always worth asking. What am I doing that maintains this? What would happen if I stopped doing it entirely? Not forever. Just, what would it be like to not try for a specific period, and to observe what happens when the effort that was feeding the system is withdrawn? Second-order change cannot be forced, but it can be cleared space for. And clearing space for it usually means, first, identifying what first-order solutions have been filling that space. Paul Watzlawick died in 2007, having spent decades arguing for something that his colleagues in more traditional forms of therapy sometimes found heretical: that insight is not enough, that understanding the origin of a problem does not automatically change it, and that the most effective interventions are often the most counterintuitive. He was right. Not always, not about everything, but about this specific class of problem, the chronic, persistent, effort-resistant pattern. His framework is one of the most useful things I have encountered. Most of us carry at least one of these: the thing we have been working on, the pattern we can see, the problem that has been around long enough to feel like furniture. And almost all of us, almost all of the time, respond to that problem the same way. More awareness, more effort. More of the same approach that has not been working. Watzlawick would say, before you try harder, ask whether trying harder is the thing that is keeping you where you are. The question is uncomfortable. It is also one of the most freeing questions there is. Subscribe to the Lucid Mind. Think deeper, live clearer.